welcome. We love seeing a full house in the Zoom room. I'm Amber Garrison Duncan. I'm Executive Vice President at CBEN. For those of you who have joined us for CBEN webinar huddle before, we like to have cameras on and conversation and being able to talk in the chat. So if you're able and that is you're able to join us in that way, we would love for you to join us in that way. But we're also happy to have you listen along today if that's where you're at today in participation. So it's good to see so many wonderful colleagues from across the nation, lots of familiar faces, and again, some new faces. So thanks for taking time to join us. We're just getting everybody with their entrance into the Zoom platform. While we're waiting, I would love for folks to just pop in the chat your name, where you're joining us from today, and the organization or institution you work from. As I was looking at the registration list, we have a very wide disbursement of people calling in from all over the US, but certainly some of you work at colleges and universities, some of you work at nonprofits, some of you work at state agencies, some of you are journalists. So let us know where you're from, what type of organization you work for in the chat. And we'll see all that come in. And I think we're probably at a place, Brenda, we've gotten everybody in that was waiting into the Zoom room. Okay, I'm going to put just a couple of slides up. I also would like to introduce Noah. Noah, you want to say hello? Noah works with Whiteboard Advisors and is a great colleague and communications organization with us. And Noah, we're lucky to have your expert moderation today and assisting in this process. But again, on behalf of CBEN and New Classrooms, just welcoming all of you here. Thank you for making time. We've been exploring math pathways, which is not a new conversation, but is one that we feel has unfinished work. And so, again, we have been doing some exploratory piloting of new approaches and are here to share an overview of that work. And we have some of the pilot campuses here to share their experiences and then to hear from some researchers and national leaders about what the implications are of what we've been finding over the last 8 months. So what we'd like to do just to kick us off is I'm going to start with some overview slides from CBEN's perspective and my colleague George from New Classrooms. And then I'll turn it over to Noah to lead on that, the pilot panelists. So here we go. I'm going to get this teed up here. And hopefully you all can see the screen, what we've got going on. You see early insights, math skills, and credentials of value.
Yep.
Woo. Okay, awesome. Real quick, I do want to provide just a quick overview of when we say credentials of value. What we mean here is that we want to make sure that any credential that we're supporting you to build in the ecosystem, whether it's a certificate or a degree or micro credential, that bundle and that set of competencies actually has value in the labor market, meaning you can actually use those skills to increase the earner's wages and again continuation of education. So we feel like that's really important and why we always hone our work in what is of high quality, again, what's of value to the learner, and then backtrack into what are those skills and competencies that would ensure that that economic return is there. And then again, there's a further pathway for learning. We don't want any dead ends. So just as a philosophy, how we approach this work, and I think you'll start to see that play out in what we're going to talk with you and the way we've approached our work today. But partnering with new classrooms and the Teach to One model, our goal was to advance the field beyond remedial education practices by bringing a skills-based math approach. Ultimately, all of our outcomes and our goals for all of our work is to increase enrollment, retention, and completion and the career advancement of adult learners, but we know that a persistent barrier still is remedial education, and in particular in math. And so again, feeling like and knowing from the research, this is unfinished business, that we still again, while we have collectively been working on this issue and making lots of good progress, there's still some things that we could be doing to increase our success with adult learners. And so this is some of the research, again, we were grounding ourselves in as we approached this project. Um, We've got some of the authors here today, as I mentioned, but looking at reports from New America and Future Ed, it really highlighted the significant challenges that remedial education poses to our adult learners, especially again, when we think about those age 30 and older. 37% of them take remedial courses, which again, often have a high failure rate and significantly reduce that individual's chance at making it to completion. Also, that almost 30% of remedial course takers then fail a remedial course. So again, we've got 37%, and then 30% of those individuals who did not complete, then also just saw lower wages over time. And so trying to understand, again, what's happening for those adult learners, why is it that their outcomes are not where we'd like them to be? And so we said there has to be a better way. And if we were to, again, bring a competency-based or skills-based approach to solve for this problem, can we make a difference, and can we make these numbers look better? So what we started with, and if you're new to CBE, again, some of this may be a different approach, but if you're been with us for a while, this really is kind of bringing forward, again, a competency-based approach to solutioning for problems, right? As we start with understanding what skills are needed by talking with employers. We always start, again, with that outcome in mind, that credential value, and how do we define those sets of competencies that will be necessary. And we do that, again, across faculty and employers. We want to make sure too that we're not just thinking about what is desired as a learning outcome, but what are we really doing to develop those competencies, and then confirming mastery. And so assessments, again, being very, very clear about how we use those assessments to, one, know where learners are at as they come into the program, honor what they already know and can do by using those assessments, and then helping them learn what's left, and again, confirming mastery of that before awarding the credential. We want to make sure that our curriculum covers, as we know for adult learners, that, and this is where partnering with Teach to One has been a huge asset, is that because they have all the skills and course units already built, those can be customized and flexible per learner, per institution. So as you know, there's not one standard in higher education for what math is, or even what Algebra 1 is. However, we have lots of good understanding of the course content. And so we wanted a tool that would be flexible for adult learners to say, again, what do they already know? What do they have left to learn? And what do I need to do to help them learn that, including if they didn't reach mastery of competencies that should have been associated with that previous credential. Most often that would have been a high school diploma. And so we were really looking at how do we make sure, again, we're ready to cover all of those so that an individual can have mastery of all. Again, and Teach to One really enables that. We found a good friend in our nonprofit partner with seeing lots of success in high school and saying, we need something like this in higher ed. And so again, how do we enable every student to master the skills needed in a personalized pathway? And then the other piece that we really wanted to focus on is how do we provide certainly the student with that pathway, but what is it that instructors, faculty, tutors also need to know about their learners who are stuck? And how can we make sure that we're providing targeted one-on-one support where learners need it most? And so you're going to hear a little bit about, again, how institutions went at this and approached this in their implementation. But across the 3 pilot sites, I just want to share something that we have found and feel like it's a pretty significant learning as a result of looking at the skills. And that we were able to take, and again, our friends at New Classroom looked at, as we looked across the ecosystem, right? Algebra remains the most common math requirement in a credential program. But what we found is that algebra competency set often doesn't align with what employers are asking for or asking individuals to know and be able to do. So starting with that is we have sets we require, but we're not sure they're the right sets of skills. But even when we're requiring people to move into that Algebra 1 course, there is a significant jump in the number of skills that are required. than the previous education level, again, which would probably be the high school diploma. We've quantified how many skills that is and the time we're giving people to learn this. So this is kind of, again, one of our big findings in that of the 215 skills identified for the most standard college algebra course, which again, using OpenStax and um, the algebra book used for that, we learned that there's 215 skills we're requiring people to learn and pass in an Algebra 1 course in a semester, right? 144 of those are new skills to them. 71 of those should have been covered in their previous credential. But what we want, again, as we learned about that, is when you break that down, is that individuals are being asked to learn a high number of skills, 144, in 16 weeks versus 9 months or a year or 2 years of education. And while we are all about accelerating learning, we know that in our experience, that's just too much to try to learn in a set moment in time. And again, if we're trying to break this down and recognize what people know and can do already, again, we really need to look at predecessor skills and target skills, understanding if there are gaps and what we need to make up, and that we probably need more time to do that than what we're allowing them in an Algebra 1 course today. So that is our very big finding of sitting in with these colleges and their employers and their faculty. And so I'd really love to, before we dive into these pilot sites, George, I would love for you and your, if you have insights from your team as well, sitting in this work with us, helping us do this analysis, and then providing those personalized pathways. Are there things that new classrooms and Teach to One really are learning as well, and want to make sure you highlight for?
Sure, I'll underscore a couple points. First of all, as a mission-driven nonprofit, we're focused on figuring out why those completion and failure results are what they are. We've been very much focused on working with high schools and middle schools and mapping out those skills over the last 15 years. Which skills do you need to go on and be ready for the next skill? That scholarship, that information allows us to deliver this kind of very custom pathway for every student. So our approach is a little different. It acknowledges the cumulative nature of math, that if you haven't mastered fractions, you're gonna have a really tough time with equations and simultaneous equations and so forth. So it all starts with an adaptive assessment that's about 30 minutes long, and then every student gets a different roadmap depending on, what their particular strengths and weaknesses are and what they're lacking. And anyone can reach their pathway goal if they have those skills mapped out, and the lessons and worked examples are available for them for each skill. But as Amber notes, which was really pretty shocking, like, we do this over a period of years, or at least 9 months at the high school level. We can map out a skills pace that makes sense, generally 2 skills a week or so. If you do 2 skills a week in this kind of time-constrained environment, you're not going to get very far. So I think there's, some fundamental kind of policy and design work that, even if we figured out how to implement this perfectly, which still requires some work, there's still some work before that needs to bring the right people to the table to rethink what that course needs to be, especially with the workforce goals in mind, right? Every pathway should require a different set of skills. And we'd love to keep working on this to customize those pathways and to keep learning. But this pilot was successful on many fronts from a learning experience.
Absolutely. Thank you, George. And I think certainly hitting on and I think you will hear in the pilot sites as they start talking, they represent different disciplines. One campus was serving all learners in a math course, so really a cross sector of disciplines. And something we heard over and over again about just algebra in general is that it wasn't mapping up to those employability skills. It didn't get applied enough so that as AI, is intersecting with math skills, a lot of the types of computation or things that we were asking people to calculate or chart or do in the past are now being done by the machines. And what we're hearing more is a demand for the ability to quantitatively reason around that information data and the math that's included to be able to be a successful employee, have a successful career. And so thinking about again, what are we asking people to learn? Is it on the right timing and cadence? And how do we best support them in learning that in a personalized way? So, what we found certainly mirrors that. And I would love to be able to turn it over now to Noah and the pilot sites to dive in and tell you again what they were learning, their approach, and how they contributed to where we're at today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amber. I'm so excited to moderate two back-to-back kind of rapid fire panels over the next 30 minutes. I will note that we do have the chat open and would definitely support and request that if folks have questions along the way or things that they're curious about or resources they'd like to share, please do be willing to input there. We will save about 15 minutes at the end for questions for panelists from both panels and also, of course, Amber and George. So with that, I think we could probably pull down the slide and just have a conversation if it works. Oh, there we go. Makes it much easier to see. So why don't I ask each panelist just to introduce themselves and a little bit more. I'll ask you each a question just to get us started, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion. But why don't we start with Hunter at Bluegrass? Hunter, I'm really curious from your perspective to get a little bit more about what drew Bluegrass into this, and then how are you sort of working with local employers in terms of identifying the types of math skills that are essential, for jobs and really relevant for jobs in the area?
Thanks, Noah. I'm Hunter Chandler. I'm a assistant professor of math and statistics at Bluegrass Community and Technical College. We first noticed that there was a major skills gap with our students transitioning out of our math courses and into their Doge's calculation courses in healthcare related fields. We worked with our faculty to address some of those issues and realized that we need to be a little bit more intentional with our work related to contextualizing some of the skills that they're learning within the specific math courses. And we worked with our faculty, but we also were able to connect with the University of Kentucky healthcare system employers and work with them to develop some of the curriculum that contextualize some of those developmental math skills to prepare those students for their general education math course. I additionally worked with several nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and radiologists, radiographers, respiratory therapists within the area who helped us create several different applications and scenarios and even some case studies that allowed our students to explore what does mathematics look like in the fields that they could potentially go into. And that was incredibly fruitful for us because we realized that our students really appreciate the high contextualization of mathematics. Certainly, they can do the conceptual and the procedural parts of math, but what does this look like on the day-to-day basis when they actually get into the field? And that was an exciting part for BCTC to explore.
Nice. Thanks, Hunter. Rodrigo, why don't we go to you next? Maybe you could share a little bit more about the perspective from Central New Mexico, and it wouldn't be a CBE webinar unless we are also talking about prior learning. And so I'm curious, how have you embedded, prior learning assessments and some of those sort of real world pieces that happen, within the employers into your math instruction?
Sure, Noah. So I'm Rodrigo Padilla. I'm the Associate Dean for Skilled Trades at Central New Mexico Community College. So actually, we don't really have a lot of embedded prior learning assessment in the course that we chose. This project was brought to us and asked if we could identify a trades-based math course that could use the Teach to One platform, and that within the program would would be able to move on to a college level math course. And so we identified electrical trades 1015, which is electrical trades math. And so what we found was that this class doesn't have an actual math prerequisite. It just has a reading and writing prerequisite. But within this class, when you're talking about real world applications, this class uses a specific textbook called Practical Problems in Mathematics for Electricians. And the things that these students are expected to do within the course are mathematical formulas that are used commonly in the electrical industry. And those includes powers, roots, metric measures, using length, area, volume, mass, energy, temperature, using formulas for electrical current, voltage, and power, mathematical fraction problems, decimal fraction problems, problems using percent, interest, discount, average, and estimates, because as an electrician, you'll have to bid a job. And so those are things that are important. And also using the Pythagorean theorem and trigonometry, vectors, rotating vectors, and then number systems. So these are all things that we have found not only through the textbook that we have, but also through discussions with our instructors and our industry partners. These are all mathematical skills that the students will use in the real world. And so those are things that are in. And so Teach to One has actually helped us, I think, embed a learning assessment to know where the students are at the very beginning of the class, and then tailor it to them. So if they do need assistance with decimals and fractions, they can go to Teach to One, and Teach to One can go ahead and help them with that through the format that it has. One of the issues that we ran into is we have a tutoring center, and it has a math area. But as soon as the student walked in there and said, I need help with my electrical math, they said, we don't do tutoring for electrical math, not understanding that it's regular math just using electrical problems. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this really was a very attractive tool for us to potentially use in our electrical trades math.
Great. And I see some great conversation, by the way, in the chat, and thanks, Amber, for jumping in. So we'll encourage the panelists too to keep an eye on it. Durana, last but not least, would love to get your perspective on this, and especially in terms of, it's been interesting to see the different levels of leadership. From in terms of a dean, I'm curious to get your take on what motivated you to get involved in this project.
Yes, thank you for having me. I am Deronda McWayne, San Jacinto College, and I serve as the dean for our liberal arts and sciences. So the main reason is innovation and the ability to be innovative. We are consistently looking for ways, how can we support students? How can this look different? What would that look like? So this gave us an opportunity to really be innovative and try something that we haven't done before. To give you an example, we have what is known as Math R&D Council, and that is our math research and design team. And as the sponsor of that council, perfect opportunity to bring them together. We are a 6-campus college, but we have one college vision. So the Math R&D Council members, they collaborate across the district. We have math department chairs, we have math faculty, we have members from our institutional research team. And what they do is just review success data. We look at if we've implemented something, what does that look like now? And this gave us a chance to really develop something special for our students. Now, how did it look and what approach did we take? After some discussion, we expanded our efforts. The research team wanted to bring in additional support. So we decided to partner with our student success centers and our student success directors. And that we also had a subgroup of people who got together and really think it through. That group developed our pilot from the beginning until the very end, looking at
Could I?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Looking at ways of how can we bring those efforts together. So that's how we kind of designed the pilot from the areas of the instructional side, and we kind of mirrored it and we connected to our student success centers, and the directors played a huge role in that as well. This also gave us a way to look at our students holistically. We looked at different stakeholders. In addition to the student success centers and our research team, we worked closely with our advising team. They reached out to students to let them know about the pilot. We gave them information so that they can sign up and kind of see what it was all about. Our tutors were probably the most excited to be a part of the initiative. They were able to be trained on the platform so that as students came in, they could help them specifically with navigating the platform as well as answering questions. Lastly, the students, our most important stakeholders. Again, what can we do in an innovative way to help our students complete and go through those pathways so that they can be successful in the workplace?
That's a great segue, Deronda, to our next question because I'm curious. Anytime you're doing pilots, innovations, you're trying something new. And to your point, there's a number of stakeholders on campus, and I loved how you framed the learners as the most important one. And I'm curious how each of you is getting learner feedback and what they're saying, early on in terms of the differences and the relevance and the flexibility of it. So why don't actually, Deronda, if you're willing to start, just because you led into this so well, I think it'd be interesting to get your take on what the feedback has been from learners.
The main thing that we were able to gather is the flexibility. Because students were able to come during our Student Success Center hours, they could also do it online. So the flexibility, it was outside of the classroom and having tutors available to assist. What we didn't anticipate, which was another positive, as students came in for, specifically learning on that platform, we saw them coming for other courses that we offer outside of math. So it was almost like a 2-for-1. So that's probably the most impactful information we were able to gather.
I'm sure that's a welcome anytime, but especially now. Rodrigo, would be interested to get your take on how you've gotten feedback from students and what they've thought so far.
Well, the feedback we got from the students was also the same thing, was the convenience, because the course that we offered was 100% online. So they were able to access, if they were working on the course at 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they were able, if they ran into an issue with fractions and decimals, they were able to use Teach to One to be able to get them through that at their leisure or when they were able to. So they really, really enjoyed that part of it. And then just to have the extra help. And the instructor also, his feedback was that he noticed that he had less questions in class about basic math concepts and principles. He said it was a lot more about the actual electrical part, the trades part, than it was about those specific math concepts. So that's really what the feedback we got.
That's great. Hunter, curious if this aligns at Bluegrass or anything else to add from the student feedback.
Yeah, certainly. It definitely aligns with the positive feedback that we've gotten from our learners here at Bluegrass. One of the things that our students have been saying about the pilot program was that they just really appreciated how contextualized the math was for them. I think that we had a little bit of an advantage here because we connected a developmental math course with a student success class. So our students were all together learning math in a conceptual procedural way, coming to a student success course that included the contextualization of the math curriculum along with career exploration, academic planning. So it gave them a better space to feel like, oh, I'm not very confident in this. How can we move through with better study skills with those things? How can we improve our learning on the Teach to One system? So with the connection with our student success class, our students had a wonderful experience with math and also contextualizing that math. And several of our learners were actually in the healthcare field already. Some of them were LPNs moving into an ADN program. And we had them say, I wish I would have had this when I was going through the first time. I would have been able to understand where these math skills were going to impact me the most when I finally got into the field.
That's great. Well, I know from the opening chat, we have a number of institutions and faculty members who are on the Zoom. So I'm going to ask each of you sort of one last question. We're sort of rapid fire in under a minute. If you could offer lessons to the other college leaders and others who aren't on this webinar, but the college leaders who are on this webinar around implementing this pilot so far, what would it be? Rodrigo, why don't we start with you?
Lessons from implementation. We came into it a little bit late, so having a little bit more time to do it, I think, would be the lesson that we took from it. But the team that we worked with was really, really great. So we really had an easy time after we got through the initial part of implementing it. The support we got was from CBEN and from Teach to One was really, really fantastic. So but I don't really, just having a little bit, maybe a little bit more time would help. So that would be the only lesson that I have.
Time seems to be a big thing, big continuing theme during this webinar. Hunter, let's go to you next.
Big lesson for me was don't be afraid to reach out to those stakeholders, whether it's the faculty that are on campus or those employers. Working with the employers within our region opened new doors for us and trying to build curriculum that relate to healthcare related fields. And I think too, don't be afraid to get faculty on board. There are more faculty out there than you realize who are interested in, like what Dr. McWayne was talking about, innovation. It's the time for innovation, and several faculty see that and they're ready for it.
That's great. And Duranda.
I definitely agree with Hunter. The ability to bring different stakeholders together. In our instance, they actually developed the pilot. So just think about how connected they were to the results, how important they saw this initiative. So bring those stakeholders together, make sure that they have a stake in the initiative is a huge plus. And lastly, constant and consistent advertisement across the college. That is a huge one. Work with your advising team, let them assist with reaching out to students, work with faculty in terms of not letting, but bringing them in to build the curriculum and the pilot, and also just having a lead. We actually had 2 leads that worked with CBEN as well as our math R&D. So I have to give a shout out to Tim Bell and also Erica Hernandez. They were our 2 leads. So thank you for that.
That's great. Well, thank you, Hunter, Duranda, and Rodrigo. I'm going to ask you to obviously stay on for the rest of the webinar. We're going to open it up to questions and comments from the larger group at the end. For now, we're going to welcome in we're calling it a response panel with our 2 national experts. We're very lucky to have Ann Kim, who joined us on our last webinar when this project was first being launched last fall. And Anne had recently published her paper called Incomplete, The Unfinished Revolution in College Remedial Education, which if you haven't read it yet, I'd encourage everybody to dig in and really goes into some of the momentum that's gained and what has yet to really take hold. And then Victoria Bellerini from Strong Start to Finish, who's executive director, who leads a national nonprofit and will tell us much more about their work to transform developmental education reform. So with that, Anne, let's start with you. Just to kind of go a little bit more broad in terms of what you heard and what you've researched over the last couple of years. Would love to get your take on, how you feel the public narrative, maybe what you think the public narrative gets wrong in terms of the current state of remedial education, and then what we should be saying instead. I think in particular, in light of where there's opportunity given the findings that have been presented now. So, Anne, would love your reactions to what you heard and how you think about this in the way that we talk about remedial education reform.
Yeah, thank you, Noah, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And when I was on the opening panel 8 months ago, I was so excited to learn about this project and see the results. And it's really, really promising and exciting to hear what's been accomplished already in just 8 short months. So you asked about what the prevailing narrative gets wrong. And I think there are two main things that it gets wrong right now. That number one, some one size fits all algebra heavy curriculum is something that all learners have to pursue to be successful. And that number two, you can't have mathematical rigor without this kind of traditional instruction. And I think that what we heard today really, puts the lie to those two assumptions. And I really applaud CBEN and all these pilot campuses for really challenging those assumptions because, they're proving that you can have success, you can have rigor, and you can have personalized instruction that really succeeds in a non-traditional way, non-traditional formats, it gets you to even better the results than traditional developmental education. I was really struck by Amber's data with the skills mapping and that mismatch between what traditional algebra covers and what workers need and employers want. And it is a reality that fewer than a fifth of college algebra students are in majors that require calculus, which really is the only practical reason to learn algebra the traditional way. And according to the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, really only about 1 in 10 workers, 1 in 10 US jobs requires workers that to understand the kinds of concepts that high school students learn in algebra too. So for the vast majority of workers, having some other tailored conceptual, contextualized math that's quantitative, that's statistical, that's relevant to the actual field, it is a much better play, but that's not necessarily what traditional math curricula offer. And so we are in this situation now that because we're clinging to this historical attachment to algebra as a proxy for the skills that many schools think employers need, algebra remains, developmental algebra in particular, remains among the most failed classes for students and a needless obstacle for adult learners in particular who want the skills now and want to get ahead in their careers immediately. So these particular set of pilots is incredibly promising for its potential to remove those obstacles, get people into relevant careers with the skills that they need to succeed. So I'm very excited to see what the next steps are.
That's great. Victoria, would be really interested to get your reaction as well to this, and maybe you could share a little bit more about the work of Strong Start to Finish. And I'm sort of curious around how you're thinking about the momentum so far and how to build this nationally.
Yeah, thank you, Noah, and thank you to CBEN for the invitation. I feel like as I was listening to the panelists, I was thinking about how these are clearly very innovative leaders. And so I'm thinking, how can we create conditions for innovation at scale? Space, time, capacity, leadership. And I think the questions that this panel kind of talked about are the same questions that we have when we work with states and institutions, which is like around the 3 decisions that any institution has to make when a student enters college, which is first, how are they going to assess the level of skill of an entering student in math or English? Here we're focusing on math. Those two being the foundational skills that students will need in the rest of their coursework and beyond. The second question is, how are those students going to, for those students who will need learning support, how is the institution structuring that support? What is the infrastructure that an institution creates for that to happen effectively. And the third question is, what is the math requirement? What is the relevant math content that each student needs in terms of their program of study and their career aspirations? And we think about these three questions, and we've found different configurations of how institutions and states address these three questions. We've talked about these things, and I think there's a lot that we still need to continue discussing. We have examples of institutions we've worked with where, you know, their math requirement or their math curriculum was created for programs that they no longer offer. But then how do we create conditions for each institution to really unpack that? And as our colleagues on the panel, I'm sure know, this is a very labor intensive process. And so how can we best support institutions in doing this work? So at Strong Start, we do it by providing grants to states. We work directly with states, and so with institutions through states. And then by pairing them with technical assistance providers to really, help them addressing the capacity issue, to bring someone external to help them go through that unpacking that we were talking about. And I think those two things are important. I do think we still need to discuss sustainability because, philanthropic dollars can be good catalysts for change, but then we've found that high leadership turnover can really stall this reform. So something else that we need to consider.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the note about like both the conditions that need to exist to help this move forward, but also the conditions that can be an obstacle. And I'd be sort of curious just in terms of thinking about the conditions that you think from your research are needed to accelerate, this type of reform more broadly, just building off of what Victoria said. Would love your thoughts there.
Yeah, and not only building off of what Victoria said, but what the panelists said in the last panel, because I think that they are actually articulated three of the conditions that are necessary to accelerate reform too. They talked about having the time and space for a deliberate process to get stakeholder buy-in and engagement. That seemed to be an extremely important factor. And then what I really appreciated hearing from Dr. McWayne was the system-wide, the institution-wide commitment to change. And that really is an accelerant as well. Victoria made a really important point about the resources that are necessary. And the final element that I would add for accelerating reform is collecting data. The traditional approach will die hard because boulders are heavy and algebra is, the traditional math is an Everest-sized boulder. But you're going to need the data to begin convincing people that there are other better ways to get people the skills they need. And having that outcomes data, having that completion data, having all of the metrics that prove that this approach can work is going to be necessary as well. And that requires its own resources too. I know it's a pretty big ask.
Yeah, I've really been struck by this, like it takes a village, right? This idea of it's not just the faculty, it's also not just the leadership, it's the advisors, it's the tutoring centers, it's the learners themselves. One other element of this that I'd be interested, to get into, which is policymakers. And Victoria, would love your sort of take, just even both institutional policy, but state policies. We sort of think about this more broadly. How do we ensure that we're designing policies that enable this sort of innovation that's happening right now on these campuses, but also hold them accountable, for improving student outcomes? So would love your take.
Yeah, so given the limited time we have a couple of resources to share. One is our state policy framework that looks at the three questions that we discussed earlier, and how can policy address each of those questions. State policy, but this is also applicable to institutional policy, and I think my colleague Julie Adams will put it in the chat. So it's a comprehensive approach that Strong Start takes when we work with states around policy adoption and implementation and refinement. To your point about how to enable innovation, but also, having some accountability measures included, I want to share that. So we recently published a 50-state comparison of developmental education reform policies, and this was done by ECS, which is our umbrella organization, and that is something else that we will put in the chat. Interestingly, we found that since 2020, which was the last time that we did this 50-state scan, there has been a decrease in the number of states that actually require reporting as part of these policies. So to your point about accountability, now we found that a smaller number of states are actually requiring this data. So I think we need to be very mindful. We're still exploring the why of this finding. We are at the what stage, but we are now interviewing policymakers, and we will publish a blog in the upcoming weeks. So if you want to stay up to date with that information, we're going to put the link to register to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date, and we'll have more updates on that. But I think the trend is concerning, and we have to be mindful that we'll need the data to show the impact of these policies as they unfold.
Yeah, so maybe the day is a good jumping off point. Just a couple of rapid fire questions before we jump back into the and sort of open it up to the audience for Q&A comments. I'm curious, like data is a good example of this, but like how do we create a sense of urgency for the work that we heard about, on this conversation, and really reinsert this into the national conversation? So Victoria, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Anne.
Yeah, we do feel, and this is something that is on Anne's report, there was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, there was a movement that was really on most people's radar about the importance of this work, and that has lost momentum. So how can we regain momentum? And I think it must be collective work. We have to partner with institutions and other national organizations. Strong Start will be publishing core principles for remedial education reform at the end of this year. And this is the updated evidence on what works in the field. And we hope that this will provide some guidelines for states and institutions to follow, and hopefully partner with any of you here today to promote these core principles.
Awesome. Anne, would love your thoughts. Besides for publishing terrific reports and papers, what else can we do to generate senses of urgency?
Well, I think there is a major external factor that's going to create a sense
Yeah.
of urgency that can be, the momentum that this movement latches onto. And that, of course, is AI. Some people have mentioned AI already, but the enormous pressure that's going to be put on employers and workers and the workforce to adapt to the rapid fire changes in AI, meaning that we're all going to be adult learners at some point, and the traditional remedial math model simply does not work for the urgency of the shift that has to take place, and latching on to that urgency that's happening externally and presenting the solution is like, hey, look, there is a way that we can adapt to AI if we can do it quickly using these kinds of tailored teach to one personalized models, and we can revamp, we can get workers ready for this new reality that we're all going to face. So if there's a way to capitalize on the large momentum happening nationally, economically, it might provide some of that push for reform that's badly needed.
Yeah, and while I joke, I really do think the field in general is very thankful and to the report that you put out there, and not only sort of talking about the work that needs to be done, but also best practices that are existing. And so I think having these types of conversations around promising innovations, how we can continue to learn and innovate are so needed, and want to encourage everyone to continue to share this out. Last question for Anne and Victoria. We've heard a lot about stakeholders and who should be involved. Are there ones in particular that you think we may have overlooked or that we haven't mentioned already that you think are critical to this conversation and really implementing math pathways moving forward? Anne, I'll start with you.
I think the panelists did a fantastic job covering the waterfront, and I'll just put in one more plug for the employers, because that seems to be the factor in, tailoring a curriculum that will really work for both learners and institutions, frankly, to have a product, so to speak, that employers want. And that's going to be the key to success.
Awesome. Victoria?
Yeah, my question is, how do we create spaces for math faculty and employers to work together? I think the current institutional infrastructure doesn't really allow for that. So how can we build that into the processes that we do have to make sure that we're teaching the relevant math skills?
Awesome. Well, with that, we can open it up, and I would encourage folks, to come off video or to come on video, throw questions in the chat, raise your hand. Happy to call on you. Welcome, thoughts, reactions, comments, feedback, questions for our, terrific panelists from both the pilot campuses, international experts and leaders, and in Victoria. Guys are a shy bunch today. Yes, the answer is we will definitely send out a PowerPoint, and I'm sure the CBEN team will also share a recording.
Absolutely. And you all should be on our newsletter distribution as well. We'll send out the recording via that distribution link. I would love, Brett, you got a question? I got a hand raise.
I do. This is more for the practitioners. Recognizing there's so much to this, rather than eat the elephant all at once, where would you suggest starting on campus?
Yeah, I'll sort of toss that over to Hunter, Rodrigo, Duranda. Are there thoughts you have in terms of, what's one part on camp where to start versus thinking about this all at once?
I would say and suggest the first place to start is with data and statistics. That will help you to decide exactly where do I need to focus, what course, at what point. Really looking at seeing the students' progression over not just a semester or a year, but looking at 5-year trends. We typically start with data. It's very difficult to develop and create a plan that is effective if you really aren't sure what your target is. So that would be my suggestion.
My suggestion would be bring together multiple faculty partners. It's not just the math department. It has to be another department on campus that comes together. We had such amazing conversations with our healthcare and allied healthcare departments and faculty. When you brought us together, we got to discuss with each other the things that we're passionate about. Math for me, and then the healthcare related parts. I was telling Amber this the other day. It's really important that we have those conversations because a mathematician can create a problem that gives someone 100 units of insulin, and that's not good. And I need to know that in the context of math and teaching this curriculum. And that gives us space to have those like funny conversations that, oh, that's probably, yes, mathematically correct, but let's change the numbers here a little bit and make it a little bit more realistic. And I think that when you create the space of faculty, that's going to feel like it comes from faculty and not an administrative like burden onto the faculty. And that brought so much accelerated movement for us, and didn't feel like our timing was too off.
Yeah, I agree with Hunter on that. For us, because we were a specifically trades-based math, I think the best thing that we did was bring in the math faculty to evaluate our course that we had. And they were actually quite surprised how advanced the math was within our class. And so I think that breaking down the silos between, because, we're in the trades areas, and then we had our math, science, and engineering school. And I think breaking down that barrier allowed us to show our math colleagues how what math that we actually use within the trades. And I think that was a really, really positive thing that we took from this. And I think that's a really good place to start if you're in the trades and you're trying to implement or work with another department, bringing them in is a really, really good place to start.
Amazing. Any other last questions, comments, thoughts for the group? If not, I'm going to toss it back over to Amber to wrap us up and tell us a little bit more about what's next.
Sure. Well, thank you to all of our panelists for being along on the journey with us, from concept to implementation. Again, we've been trying to learn in true CBEN fashion, which is get in there, try it out, see what we discover, and then iterate from there. And so, in that vein, a couple of things that we feel are important to continue to explore in this topic is, there were lots of questions about skills alignment, what's going to work, what's not going to work, how do we have more systemic approaches to engaging faculty from math, but also in the disciplines as they're trying to figure out how does this get contextualized when our institutional structures do not, we've always struggled with this interdisciplinary question. And so really thinking kind of like what Hunter said, and certainly heard Duranda and Rodrigo saying, how do I reach across? Because what we may see is if we don't reach across is that we will be requiring people to take more math classes, which is probably not the answer when what we need are more contextualized, personalized math pathways to my application of math skills in my field. And that's just going to be a challenge I think we will see our innovative leaders start to tackle and understand how to do that, how to set faculty up for success, how to set faculty up to have, again, these deeper conversations with employers that they really need. And then again, what I would say though too is that we didn't hear resistance from these folks. They were excited to be in those conversations and to know that there was an opportunity to discuss, where do students go with these skills? How are they using them? And again, how do I make sure my students are going to be successful? So I know sometimes faculty can feel like a burden, but we found that faculty were excited, thrilled to jump into this conversation. But a couple things that I think we will prioritize moving forward is a flip in some of the solutioning that we're going to do. If you think about a lot of the math solutions to date, it's being about providing a set of curriculum, a set of assessments. And I think what we've heard here is, again, that personalization and that flexibility of tools is really going to be needed as we move forward, so that as, again, most of the tools out there are, here's the one set of skills to master, you get a set time frame. And again, that's not going to work per student, let alone per industry. And so we need more flexible tools like what Teach to One has been able to model and be able to provide that per situation and site and region. We know we need, again, curriculum that's built for both the core math skills and the contextualized quantitative reasoning skills. So again, as Hunter mentioned, like I can go and compute something and make it mathematically correct, but if I'm not reasoning and saying like, no, do not give someone 1,000 milligrams of insulin, that level of intervention on behalf of people and saying that's not the right approach. We're hearing that more and more where employers are saying, again, I can have other things calculate this, but I need the person and the human to be that reasoned, that critical thinker, that understanding of where to take that tool. And so we really want to be able to have more integration of core math with contextualized math, again, bringing those faculty across lines. And then just, I think having more comprehensive maps of what this actually looks like. And there were great questions about, math 215 to this. I think what we're seeing is people aren't even aware of all the gaps that exist at the moment. Rodrigo, I think it's so interesting again that you all sat down and looked at that and said, oh my gosh, you probably hadn't looked at that in quite a while as a faculty, or hearing the Bluegrass faculty say like, we just haven't looked at this in about 10 years. So getting a chance to say what is here, what's relevant, where are those misalignments, so that we can correct them and make sure that learners are not experiencing that, because it causes frustration. It causes people to stop out when they they experience those things. So again, just appreciate everyone saying this is, again, we're not finished with the Math Pathways movement. Victoria, we're here to help restart and keep that going. We still have things to learn and do. And so CBEN really looks forward to being here with you and a part of that, and encourage you to, again, reach out to us, sign up for our newsletter. There will be explorations of this at our annual conference at CB Exchange. Brenna, can you pop the chat, or one of the CBEN team members pop CB Exchange in there? We'll have special meetings about that, breakout sessions, and then some new resources coming out about that time in November. So we'll make sure, again, just some discovery guides of how you can have this conversation on your campus and convene the right folks and walk through some of these items. So we look forward to what's next. And again, appreciate everyone who's on the journey with us. We will get back to math and making it meaningful and relevant and flexible. So thanks, everybody. All right, we'll see you next Tuttle.